came, we're going to just do the formal part of this cookie so we can walk around and talk and eat, because that's really a lot of what this is about, is celebrating. And I know that there's some people coming from the east side of LA who were extremely influential in the book. I'm going to be very careful here because this is in some ways a book about Los Angeles. And it's a book about 12 early childhood programs that some very astute and very determined and very dedicated advisory board members, who I can mention their names, and they're here. They're all listed in the book. I'm not going to read the book, and I'm not going to name them because I'll forget somebody. But this project was funded by what has become the National Center for Research on Early Childhood Education. The Federal Department of Education decided in 1995 that maybe early childhood was indeed something to do with education, and they decided to have their very first research center, and they gave it to a team of us here, Frank Porter Graham at North Carolina and a few other universities, Virginia. Go just slide it, it's okay. University of Virginia. And we still have it. We still are, through many, many iterations, 15 years later, the same team of us, those of us who haven't retired, are the Early Childhood Research Center for the federal government. Isn't that exciting? So in the beginning, we had lots of money and lots of freedom to do what we wanted to do. Now things are a lot tighter. Maybe in a few years I'll tell you about what we're doing now. But for the fun thing that we had to do was Dick Clifford, who's at Frank Porter Graham, and I were the PIs on the part of the big center that was simply to describe early childhood programs for young children that were doing a good job in serving poor communities and communities of color. That was all. We just were supposed to identify them and describe them. So Dick and I had both been advocates as well as researchers in our own communities, and we both made up advisory boards and found very good people to help run the project, and they're all named in the book too. I'm not naming names or I'll forget again. And we asked the advisory boards to find us some really good programs that did a really good job of providing care for little kids in poor communities and communities of color. And first they said, well, we better talk about what a good program is. And so there was one, Richard and I were sitting around my kitchen table with a few other people having a very long conversation about what in the world was a good early childhood program in about January 1996. So we did come up with a set of criteria, and one of the fun parts of the book, fun chapters I hope people enjoy, is reading about what the advocates said. Please come in, we're just talking a little bit. What the advocates said and what our research instruments said didn't exactly calibrate. They kind of said the same words, but they weren't quite the same thing. So we proceeded. The advisory board nominated about twice as many programs in each community and our research team went out and talked to the directors and asked them if they wanted to be part of this exciting adventure, and then brought nominations back to the advisory board, and the advisory board actually selected them. So in the end, because of some financial rearrangements of money, we ended up not with 10 sites in North Carolina, but with 2, and we ended up with 10 here. And we proceeded to spend, the researchers proceeded to spend about 2 years. Please come in, Kathy. People are drifting in, and that's okay. And please sit down. People should sit. It's too hard to sit up. So we spent over 2 years being in the programs, visiting them a lot, having focus groups of all the directors, focus groups of the advisors. We interviewed every single staff member who wanted to be interviewed, every single director. And I was talking yesterday with my PSC colleagues, and one of the most amazing things is we audio taped translated and transcribed everything. If we had weekly research meetings that we audio tape translated and transcribed, because everything was in English and Spanish, and we ended up with, you know, an electronic file that was quite enormous. And so after about 203 was the first set of publications that came out of this project, articles and journals, and we had concluded and been able to conclude, it's quite exciting, that our research instruments that we had been so attached to for so many years, the Eckers and some of those that some of the early childhood people know about, and the advocates completely agreed. Every single one of our programs got very, very high scores on all the research instruments. National Association for the Education of Young Children thinks that children should be in small groups with lots of adults, that the teachers should have advanced education. That was all true. I was particularly interested because I'm an attachment theorist, and the kinds of relationships that children were building with their teachers, they were almost all positive, and if they weren't positive, it was usually because these kids had come from pretty difficult backgrounds before they got to the programs, and they were really hard to form good relationships with. The teachers were doing a really, really, really good job. But we were having a hard time really, really, really clearly describing what these programs looked from the inside. And that's what this book is about. And this book is filled with glorious stories. And I just would like to share them all with you, but I'm not going to talk very much. So the whole back half of the book is stories. So for those people who think I only do numbers, they're stories. What we found is that you really had to look, and this is the notion of the kaleidoscope, you had to look through these programs with 3 very important lenses, or 4 if you count. They're all great, all right? So the first lens is they're all great. The advisory board thinks they're great. The families that use them think they're great. The research that went in thought they were great. The people we paraded from across the country to look at the programs thought they were great. So they're great programs, right? The kids are doing fine in school. So that's one lens to look at these programs. Another lens that you need to look at these programs is, what does it take for a child to come, these kids are really little. Some of them are like 12 or 14 months old, and the biggest ones of them are going to kindergarten. So if you're thinking about kids, think little. And they come in the morning, and for most programs, they spend the whole day there, and they need to be taken care of in ways that they feel loved, and they feel like they can trust these people to take care of them. And we were asking, what helps these adults do this? Because here are adults that have ideas about how to take care of children, and then there are the children who have ideas about how to be taken care of. And so one lens to look at this is to say, were teachers able to create constructive relationships with children? I told you the punchline, they were. But what were the challenges, and what were the things that helped them? And I'm so glad some of the people just walked in, because the punchline for that is that the challenge was to take care of a child who was not from your home cultural community. A cultural community is a group of people who have ideas about how things work and what practices are, and they often have a racial identity connected to them. And so if you had a child who came into a program with from a different home cultural community than the cultural community of the program, that was the hardest kind of child to build, for teachers to build a positive relationship with. Let me just give examples. The North Carolina coastal teachers were all white teachers who had all black kids. In one of our programs in Los Angeles, they were all African American teachers who been teaching for a really long time and were really good at what they did. And they'd been teaching black kids, and then they started teaching all Latino kids. And so those were challenges for these teachers. And one of the things that we found with all of our other lens, which is looking at what people did, talking to them, and looking at them through the lens of what are practices, we found that if they had access to the anti-bias curriculum, and if they really believed that you could
talk to children about bias, about discrimination, and you can help children feel loved and cared for and protected in the face of racial discrimination. And using some of the tools of the anti-bias curriculum, and then it made a big difference when you had those more challenging relationships to build. So that's one of the things that we wanted to talk about here. We were able to divide our programs into what we call core cultural communities, and I'm really going to stop because otherwise you will have nothing to read. But some of our programs were well-established African-American teachers with African-American children that have been really at the table when a lot of the professional standards for children and a lot of the advocacy that happened in Los Angeles. Please come in. And so we had a group of programs that were from that, really fit into that grouping. We've had a group of programs that were chronologically newer, that were within Latino communities. They were directed by Latinos. There were Latino children all the way through because this is Los Angeles. But these were programs that were really programs that were struggling with mothers' immigration issues, mothers needing to work. In fact, one of the programs was started not because the mothers particularly wanted to be early childhood teachers, but because they figured out if somebody could go to work and somebody could take care of the kids, and then we could switch off, and it all would sort of work. Many of us took care of our children. So then that grew into another program. The North Carolina programs I've talked about a little bit. The North Carolina programs have been closely affiliated with the Frank Porter Graham Centers, and they were like pictures of perfection about early childhood education and NAEYC and developmentally appropriate practices and comprehensive services and mentoring people. They were that I always felt like, oh, they just look like they came out of a catalog. And then when we talked to the teachers, and Dick Clifford was just amazingly helpful here, when we talked to the teachers and we read all of our transcripts, we came to understand that they, sometimes you think of NAEYC in the words of one of the teachers and directors in Los Angeles as a white developmental practice programs for white kids. But in fact, these teachers had figured out how to do developmentally appropriate practice and the anti-bias curriculum in ways that really respected and cared for each children. We had 100% of those children were securely attached to their teachers. And then the last cultural community is one that we call diverse families, and or we're determined to change the world and make it better for the children in our care. And these were all programs in Los Angeles that had been started really from a social justice point of view, and they were all very, very charismatic, fabulous, all-white women directors who were more or less my age, but remember this was 15 years ago. And they had trained a cadre of fantastic teachers, primarily Latino, and were doing this really good job. Now, inside all of these programs, there was fierce contestation, lots of different ideas about how do you provide good care, and some of those ideas that were really different inside programs were about what language do you talk to kids, how do you talk to kids about race, how do you talk to kids about bias, how do you talk to kids about emotions, how do you help kids learn not to hit each other and share toys. I mean, all of those things needed to be worked out within the program. So I've lost track of my lenses, but one of the lenses we had to look through was how do you just deal with these problems of these, put kids in a room, how do you figure out how to work with them, and those become the practices, and that's a lot of examples. Yeah, that's all I can say. So I have to sit down. I'm happy to sign books, and I want to chat with all of you that I know and love, so please enjoy the refreshments.